Today in our podcast, we have Professor JP De Ruiter. He's a professor at Tufts, and he's also a cognitive scientist and psycholinguist. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining our call today. So I guess my first
It's an
question,
honor.
thank you so much. My first question for you is, what does a psycholinguist study and why this field of study is very important for our society?
I don't know if it's important for society, to be honest, but I'm happy to explain psycholinguistics. So, psycholinguistics, the term suggests, is a combination of psychology and linguistics, and it basically studies how not only how language works or how people work, but how people and especially brains use language to establish communication between different brains or different people, if you want. So it's like a discipline that is focused on basically exactly what we are doing right now, which is communicating through language.
I think the interesting thing about it is that when it comes to like therapy, there's like the uses of chemistry and then the talk therapy with the therapist. So I think the uses of language is quite important for like individuals and the society itself. So I do think it's a very important field.
Thank you, thank you. I wouldn't dare to claim that because most of my students think it's pretty boring, but yeah, it has its important sides. I agree with you, especially in politics.
I agree. We're gonna talk about this in like a couple of minutes. So Professor, a couple of years ago, I went to New York to visit some of my friends. This was around 2022. That was after COVID. And there, one of my friends, he showed me a program where he was able to talk to him and ask him to write a poetry for him. And that program was ChatGPT. And I was very impressed. So I went back home and I started playing with it. And I was like, humanity, this is progress, right? But at the same time, when it comes to the way it communicates, it still felt robotic. However, a couple of years forward, now it feels more of a trying to be human-like. So, Professor, when you first was introduced to ChatGPT, what was your first impression?
Oh, that's a good question. My first impression was that I I could see how it was compelling, that people are impressed, and I was impressed by how the statistical prediction of words can sound so convincing. But I was also worried because many people would see it as real intelligence. And in my other field, my general field of cognitive science, we have specific ideas about what intelligence means. And I was, for instance, quite shocked that ChatGPT could not compute, not make numbers, multiply numbers, or play chess for that matter. Um, and of course, the more input these systems have, the better they become, as you yourself indicated in your question. Um, but I am still a bit worried that what we are having here is a system that is not inherently intelligent. It just gives answers that we like to hear.
How do you,
And
how would you
yeah,
define intelligence?
well, so that's not my subfield specialty, but it's only that as a cognitive scientist that how would I define? That's a very good question. Um, So I would not define it as the Turing test. I don't know if you heard of the Turing test. The Turing test is that someone can fool us that we believe that they're actually a human being. Good. So it's not that if I believe that on the other side is a human, then therefore it's intelligent. That was Alan Turing's definition. What I think is intelligent, if I give the computer a new game that doesn't exist yet, so here's the rules, and then I say start playing this with me, and it can play this better than me. That was what I call artificial intelligence. The problem with these statistical models is that they sound intelligent, but as we all have experienced, that they sometimes generate what is technically called bullshit. And there is a technical definition of bullshit, which is by the philosopher Harry Frankfurt, which is it says things that sound good for effect, but we don't care if they're true or not. It's not that they're always false. We
Mhm.
just don't care if they're true or not. And that's a great definition by Frankfurt of bullshit. And this is exactly how these machines work, because they're not only predicting the next word in the sequence and using that to generate answers, they're also trained by armies of volunteers or paid people to give answers that people like. And that's an aspect that most people are not aware of. They're not only predicting language, they're also trained to be to say things that people like to hear, pleasant things. And that's why they always, whenever you ask them at ChatGPT, it's always like, "Oh, that is a very interesting question. This is worth going into, even if it's a really stupid question." I tested this, so there are dangers involved. I'm still worried about it because if we feel that it's intelligent and we start trusting it, and in fact it makes big mistakes, that is a dangerous situation.
I think one interesting thing about ChatGPT is at the time of its release. So as you remember, we were living through COVID and people were isolated and we were
Mm.
not communicating with each other. And then out of nowhere, this big tech company was like, "You're not communicating with each other? How about you start communicating with a robot that you think is more intelligent than you?" And I still
Yeah.
believe that we didn't go through the repercussions of the COVID and how isolated were our society. And now we became became so dependent on the chat GPT and the communication with it. So how would you view the impact of, our society communicating with AI and chat GPT, and how would that impact the way that we communicate with each other?
Yeah, this is an important point. Again, very good point, Tarik. Um, the and it was ironic that it just started after the pandemic, and sort of like an ironic accident of nature. Um, that yeah, so there's a big discussion, an ethical discussion going on. Let me just illustrate it. Like if you or I, both active professionals in our jobs, in the middle of our life, middle-aged, young, you, me, middle-aged, whatever, if we start relying on artificial intelligence models to manage our social lives, to have a social life, I think most people would agree that that would be a bit sad. Because we would be able to go out and meet people and talk to each other like we are doing now. And that's much more real and much more satisfying. And I would hope everyone would actually socialize with real people. And the pandemic, as you said, has indeed destroyed that a little bit. There's a generation of students who are definitely less good at communicating, socializing with each other because in their critical phase of their development, they were basically locked up inside and doing Zoom or not even that. So for healthy functioning individuals, it is sad if they start developing relationships with AI that is actually not real. On the other hand, if you have, and I've just heard about this on a podcast somewhere, there is an 80-year-old woman who's lost all her family, outlived all her family. Nobody visits her, and nobody wants to talk to her. And maybe the people in the old people's home occasionally say, "Good morning, how are you, Mrs. Smith?" But that's it. If this person can have extensive conversations with an AI and feels good because of that, it's hard to argue that that's a bad thing in itself.
But it goes back to your main point, the previous point, which is AI is more of like an echo chamber. So if you have
Yeah.
some like, I don't know, like racist views, or even you have this, you're living in a bubble, AI will only emphasize that. So I'm like the fact that that woman might not, have to interact with others who might disagree with her, and the only one she's interacting with is AI. If anything, that would take her much deeper into her own bubble and maybe radicalize a couple of her own views as well.
That's a good point, Tarik, and I'm glad you bring it up. But in my analysis, I make a distinction between socializing for social reasons, just because we want to feel understood and have the feeling someone is at least listening to us, and for instance, constructive discussion. Like if I would meet you for coffee, I would expect us to have a constructive discussion that we both learn from. But if I'm like 90 and I'm in the old people, I'm just lonely, I may have different needs. Maybe I just want to have a conversation so I can get off my chest what I wanted to say and get some feedback. I don't know. It's just hard for me to judge that. That's what I mean.
But as a psycholinguist, okay,
Hmm.
I'm assuming because you have very strong understanding of language, do you have the ability to differentiate when you're reading something if it was written by AI or a human, and what kind of things differentiate something written by AI and a human?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's it's getting, of course, harder and harder. In the beginning, when my students hand in some essays that are written by AI, I would immediately see it. It's just in my face. It was like, nah, come on, that's clear. They are getting better and better and better. I can still tell. I think I am still like 80% accurate in detecting it. But that's because I'm hypersensitive to it. I work with large language models myself, so I know them quite well and I study their behavior. So, so it's getting hard. It's getting hard. What I think, so let me just say something that may not answer your question directly, but it may answer it indirectly. I remember we were having a retreat with my department, and someone said, like a retreat where we just discussed the future and stuff. And someone said we need a vision statement. And I just jokingly said, why don't we ask ChatGPT to make a vision statement for us? Everybody giggled and said, let's try that. So we typed it in and we got a vision statement. And the first response everybody had was, wow, oh, that sounds good. And then, okay, let's take this as a starting point. And then we started to actually look at the content in more detail. And we're like, okay, that's not exactly what correct. That's not exactly. That may be a bit different. That's a bit vague. Let's replace this word by that. And in the end, it turned out that 90% that felt good in the beginning was actually not really accurate, not really useful. It was just sounding good, and that's the BS effect again. Um, if you go into detail, it sometimes is not accurate enough. But as I said, it's a moving target, and they're getting more and more convincing, and we have to be more and more vigilant in figuring out um, what the actual contribution, what the actual content is in there. And especially for people like you as politicians, what is a problem with the biggest problem, I think, with large language models is that I don't want to call them chat GPT because that's just one of them, and I don't want to give them an unfair advantage over the others. The large language models, what the problem is for politicians and for society in general is it's becoming very cheap to generate messages.
Yeah.
And you can use them to flood social media with convincing sounding messages. And in older days, countries like, I guess, the Soviet Union or Russia had armies of people who were paid to produce stuff for that. And that's expensive, even though there are people at shape, but you need a lot of them. But now it actually has almost zero cost. You can just generate it and generate it and generate it. And it sounds to the people who read it like, oh, there's a lot of people having very convincing arguments for, I don't know, lobbying or capitalism or whatever it is that you want to defend. But it's actually representing just one person who thought like, oh, let's ask ChatGPT to generate a whole load of propaganda text. And so it becomes very important to know what the origin is of thought. Is the origin a statistical model, or
Mhm.
is there a real person behind it? And if there's a real person behind it, is this person accountable? Because the large language model is not accountable. You can't blame it. It's just software. Whereas a person is, in theory, uh, depending on your political system, but accountable for what they say.
It's funny you mentioned it because it tied to my next question, which is, when we talk about AI and people fear of AI, they talk about, the government should regulate the usage of AI when it comes to like images and videos, but they don't talk about text.
Mm-hmm.
So like they don't say, oh, maybe the government should like enforce certain regulation when it comes to the usage of AI to create text and propaganda, and even like in the schools, for instance. So do you think that there should be some kind of like limitation on the uses of AI when it comes to like languages and text and the whole propaganda thing?
Absolutely. I have not thought of this in this form before because I didn't know that they excluded text. So thank you for telling me that. But my my first instinct of this is they should text at least as important as images and sound. Of course, it sounds more dangerous to have images. Oh, look, Trump is doing this, and it turns out to be generated by AI. That is bad, but the text it's more subtle. And so if there's a press statement, for instance, who is responsible for the press statement? Is it an AI? I think it's actually more dangerous with text, and that should be definitely be regulated in the form of accountability. I mean, if I generate a text with AI and give it to you, I think it's fair to say that I'm responsible for what it says. I do the same with my students. Okay, if you want to use AI and I don't detect it, fine. But if the AI makes a mistake, you get 0 points because it's your responsibility.
I like that perspective. Do you think we should implement that in schools? Like, if it's okay to use AI, but if it made a mistake, then it's your responsibility.
Yes, and it's punished harder than if you make a mistake, because if you as a person make a mistake, that's just the predictable learning process. We all make mistakes in whatever we learn. But if it's a mistake because you were too lazy to think for yourself, yeah, I think that's a principle I would like to see everywhere.
Have you noticed, I mean, since you're a professor and you've been teaching for a long time, have you noticed that the quality of a student communicating or even communication or even writing has went down because of the uses of AI?
Well, it's how do I say this? I've noticed it going down. Let's start there dramatically.
Mhm.
But I don't think it's only because of AI. It's definitely a contribution, but it's not the AI itself. It's because of a larger system around it. There's grade inflation. The idea that everyone has the right to participate in higher education and get an A for showing up and doing their best. So there's no differentiation anymore. Everybody gets A's now in general. That is one, and the same happens in high school education. The idea that there's no differentiation anymore, I think, is dangerous because um, that makes students entitled and lazy, and that's not their fault. I mean, they're just minimizing effort and maximizing outcome, which is completely reasonable. But if we
Mhm.
create a system in which minimizing effort and maximizing output becomes easier, for instance, by using AI, that deteriorates it even more. And it is actually it's actually true that the use of AI has I I think especially people teaching things like English composition or history will notice this a lot. If they don't do their own homework anymore, they don't learn. And you know what the real problem is, if I may say that, with AI in education, it's is not that it's not useful. AI can be very useful for you, for me. We can use it to be more efficient, to code faster, to formulate faster, to look up things faster. But you and I are still from a generation that have learned to do things ourselves. So we can judge whether the output of an AI is good or maybe not so good. We have BS detectors. We're like, nah, this doesn't sound right. The new generation, who has only seen AI and have never learned to do write or program or think for themselves, have no idea whether the output of an AI, what the quality is. And that's the dangerous thing. And I keep hearing my colleagues saying, oh, but it's very useful to learn how to use AI. Yes, for you it is, for me too. But for someone who doesn't have any basis for judging the output because they've never learned to do it themselves by hand, it's really dangerous. I think that's the biggest problem we're having.
And what would you, since I'm running for U.S. Congress, what piece of advice would you give for these politicians when it comes to like regulating AI in schools and education? Do you think, like, for instance, like some parents don't allow their children to have access to social media or even get phones until like they're like, I don't know, in high school? Do you think how do you think we should approach it? Because I totally agree with you. It is extremely dangerous.
Well, you're creating two issues here. I can answer both. The one is social media, which was already present before AI, and and the other is the use of AI. As for social media, I do believe that the point that Jonathan Haidt is making recently, that social media are very, very damaging to developing children, which has led to, well, not led to, but has contributed to countries. I think Australia is now banning it until 18, and some schools are banning them in school. There's a movement that says children should not be completely immersed in social media before a certain age. I believe, but that's not as a psycholinguist. It's just as a human being who thinks that Jonathan Haidt is right there, and others who claim the same thing. I think it's dangerous for especially young children and especially girls. It turns out to be completely exposed continuously, to have their whole life on social media and their value system and everything developed there. I think it's very dangerous, and I'm not sure if banning it is the best solution, but I can understand why people want it. And there's definitely something we should do about it. I agree.
I think there's a similarity between AI and social media where both of them try to always show you what you already agree with.
Oh, the echo chamber thing.
Yeah.
Yes, that is a good point. Yes, and that's not necessarily the reason that it's bad for children's development, although it contributes. There's also the thing that, for instance, young people are exposed to idealistic, good-looking people who are always successful, and that becomes their new norm.
Mhm.
And therefore, they're always unhappy because they're not as happy as the people they see on Instagram. That's another effect. That is not AI related. But what you say, the echo chamber that everybody always tells you you're right, either because you selected the people on social media that always agree with you, or because the AI is trained to always agree with you, that is very bad for our critical thinking. I agree.
How would you view a world where we don't enforce any regulation on social media or AI? Like how much worse our communication in society might turn if we don't like put our foot into the door and like do something about it?
Well, there's actually two excellent books in literature about that, and I remember as a teenager reading both of them. One is 1984 by George Orwell. The other is Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, which I think is even more important, although fewer people know it. And I was always thinking like, how I'm a bit of a pessimistic thinker, so I was already at 16. So it's like, okay, so how is society going to develop? Is it going to be more like 1984, or is it going to be more like Brave New World? It turns out I was completely wrong because it's both. It's kind of a perfect fusion between the effect of propaganda that is emphasized in 1984 and the zombification or the capturing of our limbic systems, our pleasure centers by reward systems like social media. And they're both happening at the same time. And that is kind of shocking to me. That I was like, well, is it this one? Is it this one? No, it's both. So I think what will happen to our society if we don't stop it, and I think there's a good chance that we don't stop it, because the economic interest seems to always win, is that we basically become that we get into a world where most people are not really thinking at all anymore. They just maybe the Matrix, maybe another example, the movie where we just well, I don't know, having what we think is a good time by constantly getting dopamine rushes from short loop pleasure loops, and and of course there will always be some people who can get out of that system and manipulate the people by use it to the point of braving the world. The top layer that can manipulate the people in order to generate their own interests, to serve their own interests. That is a gloomy perspective, and I think we're heading for it. Another science fiction author who's extremely clairvoyant in this respect I want to mention is William Gibson, who wrote Neuromancer and a lot of other books after that. But that's Neuromancer's where he became famous. And he pictures a society that has high technology and sort of a dark atmosphere that is a combination between 1984 and Brave New World, which is I think his especially the vibe, to use a modern term, that he describes is kind of spot on.
It's funny you mentioned Brave New World because the way that we've met is that while I was collecting signatures outside of Whole Food, we
Yes.
met there and you recommended that book, which is an excellent book, by the way. But Professor, as you know, I'm running for office, and I'm
Yes.
running because I'm afraid that we might be heading if we're not living in that gloomy society, and I'm afraid of the repercussion of it, and I believe enough is enough. We need to do something about it. So let's play the devil advocate here, right here. Let's say
Yeah.
I hired you as a consultant, okay? What mistake do you see politicians do when it comes to their communication with their own voters?
That is difficult for me to answer because let me be fair, I'm not a historian or a political scientist or a communication, in that sense, communication, a public communication expert. I study human to human communication. Um, so I have to improvise here. It's not my field. What do you think is, what I think is well, it's a systemic problem. I mean, most politicians are perceived to be lying. And lying is a difficult issue. When do you lie about your intentions? Did you exaggerate? Were you pitching? There's actually this gray area between outright lying, bullshitting, and speaking the truth. So that is a difficult issue, and I think the reputation of politicians is low, and most people suspect that the politician is basically out for themselves. It is like maybe it's money, maybe it's fame, and maybe it's lobbying or whatever, but the perception is that they cannot be trusted. And the question how they can become more trusted is very difficult because I don't know. I mean, there's no accountability. That's the problem, especially in the United States, which strikes me as a country where, compared to Europe at least, speaking the truth is less important than than I'm used to from where I'm originally from. Lying is seen as very bad. If you make an appointment with a plumber in Germany and the plumber doesn't show up, you're really bad. And here it's a fact of life. Yeah, there's a 50% chance that your plumber won't show up. So there is this like a little different relation between commitment and promises. And that, of course, affects the reputation of politicians in the sense that they have a bad reputation. I'm sorry, there's no offense to you. I think you're a very reliable person, uh, but you maybe agree that the image people have of politicians is not extremely positive. And of course, the honest politicians have a problem because they can be honest, but they'll probably lose because they're honest and the others cheat. So therefore, the others win. So I don't know how to. I honestly don't know how to get out of this. There are some extremely, at least authentic politicians, like Bernie Sanders is a great example. AOC, who seem to have some success with authentic messaging, and I wish to see more of that. I wish to see more people who are not authentic in the sense that Trump is authentic, like he just blurts out whatever he feels without any norm constriction. That's not what I mean. I'm not meaning just shouting bigoted things because that's how you feel. That's not what I mean by authentic. I think authentic would be to be very honest and about what you think is right and wrong instead of how it works on the audience. I think politicians have become a little bit too focused on their polling and less on authenticity. But who knows? I mean, maybe if you were to follow my advice and you'd not be interested in polling, or just be yourself, maybe you'd lose. I don't know. It's a dilemma. What do you think of that dilemma?
I mean, I totally agree with you. The fact that the way I view it is like the uses of language by politicians tarnish their reputation among voters. And now, when we have a new wave of Democrats, a new wave of politicians who run and trying to make change in DC, these same people are viewed as okay, we can't trust you. You're the message that you're using exactly the message that somebody else using. I mean,
Yeah.
for our campaign, our top priority is fighting money in politics, and yet that same message has been used multiple times before us that nobody is willing
Yeah.
to bet on us. But we try to convince them and show them like I usually tell my voters is like if you want to judge a politician, judge them by the way they run their own election. The money that they get, where do they get it from? Do they get it from like corporate PAC? Do they get it from these big donors that contribute to the problem that we already have, or do they only take it from the people? And how, are they present in the district? Are they listening? Are they putting some effort? But it's hard to build trust with the voters because of the problem that we have here in America. And on top of that, you have the issue of polarization,
Yeah.
which polarization the usage of language to do the usage of extreme language. I mean, at least that's how I define it, the use of extreme language to blame everything on the other side so you can win more
Yeah.
votes. And that's, if anything, it's like fighting fire with fire. It doesn't heal the country that we are seeing getting more and more divided. But Professor, you talked about your background as somebody from Europe. When did you come to the United States, if I may ask?
10 years ago.
10 years ago. And how would you differentiate the way that the European society communicate with their own government in comparison to here in America? Like, what kind of similarities, what kind of differences, what we should learn from Europe, what Europe should learn from America?
Yeah, that's a good question. I so the thing that struck me most as a difference, to start with the differences, is I think I just realized that it's best summed up by, let me just explain. In the Washington Post, which I don't read anymore, but for reasons of corruption, but
This is
it
vomit.
used to it used to have this motto that says democracy dies in darkness.
Yeah.
And I realized quickly in the US that that's the wrong motto. The motto, what I would like to have, is democracy dies in politeness. Because if you see interviews, I mean, there's an exception. Recently, there was an exception with President Trump by Walker, where there was a definite, and there was another by Axios, this guy, Jonathan Swan. Sometimes there are journalists that actually say, hey, wait, that's not true what you say. Now, that is seen here as, ooh, a journalist said to the president that he was wrong. That, dear Tarik, is completely normal in Germany and the Netherlands. It's basically their standard job. We had when I was living in the Netherlands, there was some fantastic political journalist. One of the famous ones was Ferry Mingele. He would just don't take any shit from politicians. He would just like, sorry, no, I don't buy that. No, go, try again. Basically that attitude. And it was so refreshing. It is so refreshing to have just like, and that's the role of the media, is to poke and say, no, we don't buy that. Come, try again. And there is a very polite, Americans are very polite. I noticed that like day one of my work, I would say to a colleague, like, well, maybe that's not a good idea because X. And they would say, don't shout at me, don't yell at me. Try to be nice. And I'm like, I wasn't being unnice. I was just pointing out the negative consequences of your suggestion. Oh, no, you're yelling at me again. No, don't. And I'm like, oh, okay, I have to basically adapt. I'm too direct. I'm too, I don't know, too focused on content and too little on social face. I have to protect people's face more. I have to be nice. That's a good thing because it makes people much more pleasant in the US. I have to agree. That's a thing that Europeans can learn from Americans. If you're on the street, people are nice to each other. And if you're in the supermarket, you can make a chat with someone. Everybody is friendly. And the Europeans always grumpy. That's what I like about the US. But in politics, you don't have to do that. In politics, it's important to be straight, authentic, and hardcore truth oriented. You can't just have politicians, especially not presidents, let them get away with basically lying all the time. And people, oh, that's an interesting point of view, Mr. President. Ah, may I push back on that a little? Oh, no, sorry. Okay, I was just kidding. That is a ridiculous attitude. And it basically defeats the whole purpose of the press. You might as well not have a press. You might as well have ChatGPT telling the president that everything that he says is a great idea. Just because someone is powerful doesn't make them right. And this is what I perceive to be a vast difference between Western European culture, say Belgium, Netherlands, France, even the UK. It is technically not part of Europe, maybe, but culturally it is.
Mhm.
Where, especially the UK, actually, where you had like programs like Spitting Images or journalists that are razor sharp and just basically burn down entire politicians if they bullshit too much. That's fantastic, and that is what the US needs.
I mean, speaking of Trump and speaking of your field of studies, psycholinguist, I just find it fascinating, like somebody like him who doesn't know how to communicate, who barely know how even his tweets are always obnoxious. I just find it fascinating, like how did this guy become the president? Like,
I want to push back on you here a little bit, Tarik. You say he cannot communicate. It depends on how you define communicate. Because one of Trump's very few talents, he's not a very talented man, I would say, but one of his very few but very exceptional talents is to say things that emotionally feel good to a certain group of people. Now, that is a communicative talent. I mean, using grievance to rile up people and make them all feel they're part of a group, the new MAGA movement. You have to be fair. That is what he does fantastically. But that's maybe not the sense of communication you meant. If you look at, for instance, negotiation, which Trump is of the opinion that he's very good at, that is another type of communication where you have to really listen to the other guy and then compare that with your position and try to find compromise, that kind of thing. You can see that how he's now working with Iran. Is that's not his strength at all. But communication in the sense of making people feel that they're understood by him, he's very good.
so when it comes to communication, Trump and Mamdani. Do you see any kind of similarities in the way they communicate? I mean, speaking like triggering an emotion for people to do something. I mean, you've seen that happen in New York with Mamdani. He was able to, galvanize the whole youth generation and make them go out and vote. And same time, you've seen something similar happen with the Trump and his base. I know this might be a controversial question,
Mhm.
but as a linguistic, when you study both, the languages and effect on our society, do you see any similarities between both of them? Or do you see it as like, they both using the tool of communication in a different way? Like how would you define the usage of communication from both sides?
Well, to be very honest with you, I can't answer that question because although I have studied Trump in great detail, too much, I would say, for my mental health, I have not sufficiently studied Mondani's speeches or activity too much.
Mhm.
From the brief things I have seen, I think he comes across as more authentic and having better documented talking points. That's what I believe. I mean, the things you mentioned don't strike me as immediately nonsense, whereas most things Trump say do strike me as immediately as no, that's complete nonsense. So he seems to be closer to the truth, in my view, but I'm not sure. I haven't studied him, as I said. But there might well be what is the word for it again? Demagogic, something like that. There's a word for like how convincing you are to
Mhm.
the people, and I think they're both comparable at that. And I think that is also the reason they had some level of bonding when they met. I think they recognized like two top boxers that respect each other. They recognized each other's propaganda talent, in that sense, political talent. In that sense, I understood. But as I said, I would like to study Mamdani more because I mean, there's only a limited amount of time. And what do you think? What do you think is the difference between his obviously also very emotional message to that of Trump? Do you think they're comparable, or do you see more differences?
I think Mamdani, he goes from the perspective of he's a very Obama-like, I would say. Like he brings
Yeah.
positivity, he always smiling, he never use hatred or personal attacks on other. On
Mhm.
comparison, Trump, he thrive on these. Like every single politician, Trump has a nickname for them. So
True,
like,
true.
yeah. So that way,
You're
I'm
right. He's like Obama a
he
little
is
bit.
like,
I agree. Yeah, which is more positive. I agree. I agree. Yeah, yeah. It's also risky being a little bit too polite. I think sometimes politicians. I think politicians. It's good if politicians attack other politicians on content, not other groups.
yeah.
Like Trump always attacks, I don't know, Mexicans or whatever group he feels like offending. That's not what you want to do. But if you say, okay, and he even attacks other politicians, but on the wrong grounds, and he makes stuff up. But if you have really like, okay, this is what Biden did or said, and I disagree with this because A, B, C, D, and I'm going to do it different because reason X, that is something good. That is, and of course, politicians do that a lot.
The uses of propaganda. This is gonna go to my next question, which is, you know, we're heading toward the midterm. I mean, we're living through a midterm no, the
Yeah.
midterm in the November. Like we're living through the primary election in different state, and you've seen the uses of money by different, super PACs to, advertise for a certain candidate and create this kind of propaganda. So for the average voters who are being bombarded with these ads,
Mhm.
what kind of defense mechanism should they be using in order to like, decipher these ads and know, which candidate is the right one for them to vote for?
That is the most difficult question I've heard all year. I mean, the super PAC is something so absurd from a European point of view, especially the hypocrisy behind it. Like, oh yes, they can have unlimited amounts of money, but they cannot directly coordinate with the people they collect money for. That's, I think, the rule.
Yeah.
And that's a ridiculous rule. That would be, it's really absurd. It would be like yes, you and I can agree about the price, but we shouldn't uh, let these prices influence our actual prices or something. I don't know how to come up with an example because it's so absurd to suggest that there's no coordination, even if there were no coordination between super PACs and politicians. The super PACs know what the politician wants. The politician gets money from the super PAC. You don't even need to communicate. So it is a form of legalized, you could almost say legalized corruption.
Oh
Only
yeah.
if it's legalized, it's not corruption anymore. There's a political scientist from China called Ang, um, who was interviewed on Freakonomics podcast once about corruption, where she also points out that if it comes to access corruption, that is access to politicians, the United States and China are basically the same because lobby, especially the United States, lobby groups have access to politicians through money. So you get the weird situation that politicians use money effectively in the US to turn that into power because The more money you have, the more you can campaign, the more people you convince because they think for themselves. So there you go. So you can turn money into power. And what do people in industry, the capitalists, do? They have a certain power. They can make cars or they offer a certain service, and they turn that power into money. And that's where you get the revolving door. You know, the power goes to money, the money goes to power. It feeds on each other. And before know, you have vast income differences and a 1% that controls the rest of the population. What you need is a value system to dampen that loop because money and power are both value free. Power is great for people to have, and money too, because they feed each other. But where's the value? What do we do? What is it value? Integrity, prosperity. Yeah, I mean, politics should ideally be value driven and not money driven. But the reality, as you know, is often different.
What should a voter do in such a situation? Like, how do you, like, when you go out and vote, how do you pick your own candidate? Do you like listen to these propaganda? Do you decipher them? Do you do your own research? And because unfortunately we live in a society as well where a lot of people are busy with their life and the issue of affordability, do you
Right.
think it's time for the government to step in and ban super PACs altogether? Or like how would you?
Now, yeah, obviously it would be a good idea to ban super PACs because I mean, it's clearly a ridiculous idea. Um, and so, for instance, another thing too, like gerrymandering. If I go back to Europe and I explain gerrymandering to my European friends, and some of them are professors, but most of them are intelligent people, even if they're not, they first think I'm joking. They're like, "Oh, JP, you're making that shit up, huh? You're always so good at exaggerating." Like, no, 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 no. This is actually happening. It is just absurd. And yes, these absurdities should be abandoned. But people who need to have the power to either abandon them or not are benefiting from them. So that's not going to happen. I mean, sort of some form of non-violent revolution, like people protesting, for instance, but effectively and substantially, influentially protesting, which is something that Europeans are also a little bit better at than Americans. But that kind of thing could maybe bring change, but it's not going to come from the top. They're having a good time there, and they're not going to listen to me or you, for that matter, say, "Oh yeah, yeah, maybe it's unfair." But on the other hand, we have a lot of money and power now, and we're kind of enjoying that. So no, let's not. There has to be some form of movement from below, supported by politicians, maybe like you or Bernie Sanders or whoever. But there has to be some incentive for the top layer of the country to change their behavior towards more value-driven politics because they have zero reason at the moment. Because we're all toiling away and ignoring and having our social media, or in the Brave New World term, we get our shot and get high. And as long as we get high from social media, we're happy and we're not complaining. So what can you do? You know, it's any politician. That's one rule. Any politician who says that they have a solution for everything, I will distrust them. If they do not acknowledge this complexity and the difficulty, I already not trust them anymore.
I
The
mean
other
that.
thing is doing your own research, which is a bit of a loaded term now because it means like looking at YouTubes that are recommended to you by YouTube that knows what you like to see, which is also not helping. Being self-critical, I think, is the most. If you have any opinion, whether it's on climate, whether it's on Israel, whether it's on nuclear energy, whatever, try for a day to find out why you're wrong. Seriously, not just seriously, really try to find out why you're wrong. And if you then fail, you've at least learned. And sometimes you even succeed and you find out that you're wrong. That, I think, but that is something that should be taught people in school
Yeah.
to do that all the time. And that's why it's so important that people talk to people who are different from them, not just have this monolithic. We have this a bit in academia. Almost everybody is liberal. So we're all like, oh, how do we write with each other? It's very good, as I sometimes do, as a weird hobby, to discuss things with hardcore MAGA people and find out where you are. What is their point? What is their why do they think? Why, if you are so right, why can't you convince the other side? Um, what is it that makes the position different? Question your own thinking. That is very important, especially now that AIs are telling us that whatever we think of is brilliant and great and deep. We should really be self-critical, but that's hard because it hurts. It's not your instinct. Your instinct is to listen to people that you agree with and feel right instead of wrong. It's a really weird attitude, which is good scientists have this. Like someone like Richard Feynman was very famous for that. He was always self-critical. Richard Tolman, one of the founders of cognitive science, they're always self-critical, and these are the people that understand much more than the people who just surf on the flow of public opinion.
So teaching how to be self-critical is something important. to
Yes.
for our society, especially for, I mean, for me, I'm running for office. I mean, I agree with you 100%. I'm the politician. I'm a guy who would say like I don't have answer for everything. I mean, that why part of the reason why I started this podcast is so I can talk to people like you, people who are
That's
experts.
a brilliant idea, really.
Exactly. So they can tell me what they think, and because like, I have a lot of questions, and at the same time, I can share it with the voters of this district and voters across America, so they also become aware of, maybe listening to the professor or the expert is much better than listening to your ChatGPT or Grok or whatever AI app you're using. Um, so what kind of message for in a district like our district, that's one of the most educated district in the country, and one district that I truly believe should be lead in the fight when it comes to the future generation, to education, to creating a politics centered around values. What kind of message would you send to them?
Message. Well, this is the problem. That's what your job. I'm not in the. I'm not used to sending messages to people in states, even not the great state of Massachusetts. So you're basically putting me on the spot here. Uh, but your message would be your message. I kind of I don't know. You're better at expressing these messages because that's your profession. But what I feel is that what Massachusetts has achieved is fantastic in terms of high tech, of education, of living together, healthcare. Even though there is some issues with healthcare in the terms of pricing, but Massachusetts is fantastic. It's the only state I want to live in the U.S. And I'm so happy that when I moved to the U.S. it was in Massachusetts. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have gone. And these we should believe in these values. We should keep them. We should actually impose them or at least sell them to other states and not be too defensive about being liberal elite or something. We're not liberal coastal elite. We are just very smart, and that helps. Being smart is always better than being dumb, and that might be a great state motto. I like it at least more than live free or die, a neighboring state.
Yeah.
Um, so I think basically my message would be we should be more proud and more defending the good stuff that Massachusetts has achieved.
Okay, Professor. If people want to read more about you, where should they go?
Oh, the other one there you caught me on guard here, off guard here. What should I? Well, I mean, one of the things I recently there's one piece in German that nobody reads because it's German, but that I would recommend it. I have an article in Quillette about the nature of stupidity. I think that would be something uh, because what people call stupid is not really, is my argument, is not the same as being slow thinking or something. It's a specific style of arguing. It's not that you're dumber than the other. It's just a way of arguing, which we call stupid. And I think that is my in terms of politics and relevance for society, that is one that is more accessible to people than my scientific work, which I believe is interesting. But I know let's face it, I'm a nerd. So nerds will like some of the work I do in science, but normal people wouldn't. But I think the Quillette paper is one that I think I sent it to you at some point, right? Is what I would recommend if they want to understand where I'm coming from.
I just have one last comment because of I also have a background in academia, and one thing I always notice is that it feels like there is a gap between the academic world and the real world. And I really like it when professors like you who are willing to go into the public sphere and at least try to connect with the other people on the other side and try to simplify the research and simplify the things for them. Because as funny as it might seem, when we started this campaign, a lot of people told us you need to pass the sixth grader check, which is like every
Mm.
message, everything you write, you need to bring a sixth grader and ask them to read it and see if they understand it. Because if they don't understand it, no one else will. Have you heard of something similar to that?
Yeah. I know. It's tricky because if we all have to dumb down our discussion to sixth grader level, no offense to sixth graders, they're only on a trajectory, but they are young and they haven't learned enough. So it'll basically be dumbing down the decision to that level, and then you get predictably a little bit of a stupid discussion or limited discussion, I should say. Um, and I personally, you can call me elitist, but I think expertise is important. If I were to start a political campaign, I can think of about it myself, but I know that, for instance, you are much better at it and more experienced than me. So I immediately ask your advice and listen. But if someone wants to, I don't know, program a computer themselves or study human turn taking or whatever, I would recommend they listen to the expert in that field. In this case, me. Expertise is worth something, and we don't want to be a technocratic society, okay? And the interests of people who don't understand the details are also important. But not every discussion is easy. Not every discussion is simple. There are always complexities, and I think we should acknowledge that. And I think we can. make sure we represent as politicians then, represent the interests of the sixth graders and people who understand it at the level of a sixth grader. But we should be careful not to dumb down the actual discussion to that level,
Mhm.
because it is definitely more complex than what a sixth grader can understand. There's no way around it.
Professor, any last piece of advice, concern, comment, question?
Um, well, yeah, I just want to say that let's all have real discussions and make sure democracy does not die in politeness.
Well, like,
And
thank you
and,
so much.
and also I want to really wish you luck in your campaign. And I like your campaign, and I also really appreciate what I appreciated most in you is that when I asked you a critical question on text, you gave such an excellent answer, an extensive answer, and and I actually still believe we disagree on that, and I would like to talk to you about it someday. But that's where the progress is made, not in just in having lots of money and convincing a lot of people that your story is better than the others just because it sounds better, but because you have the better arguments. And yeah, I really want to wish you all the luck in your campaign. And if there's anything I can do for you, I'll be happy to help.
Thank you so much, Professor. It was nice having you here in our podcast, and
Thank you for inviting me. Yeah.
thank you so much.